Acts chapter 2 and verse 17. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith the Most High, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rechak, Wadash, the belongs to the elder apostles, and the bishops of Great Millstone, rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations to the Akim I heard pushing his gospel and truth and sincerity to the best of their ability given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon their houses. This is Brother Quanah Watts from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the Spirit and power. Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And I want to start off this lesson by, speaking on, a dream that my coworker, had shared with me earlier today. My coworker is an older Gadite, maybe mid to late 50s. I never asked him his age, but today, and sometimes he'd be randomly telling me weird things, man, just, talking about his family and whatnot, and, just in a sense venting, man. And this time he told me about a dream that he had, it was a reoccurring dream for years. And he said the last couple months, he hasn't had that dream. The last 2 months he hasn't had that dream. But he said he used to have it, periodically, for the last 3 years. And he would wake up, right before anything, major really happened. But one part that stood out to me is in the dream, he would be walking around. And again, this is from, what he had told me. He said he's walking around in the dream, and that he'll see everybody. Some people will be doing random stuff, right? And he said that it's like they just snapped their head, like they heard something, like they heard something, and they would say, someone's coming, right? A group of people standing off to the side, people, someone's coming, and they would look up to the sky, and I asked him, I said, so they would look up to the sky, and he said, yeah, they would look up to the sky, look around, and that to me, right, was real spiritual, because we're in the time, where Yahweh Shai can crack the, sky really at any moment, man. We understand that there's two major prophecies, right, that ultimately have to pop off right before that time, which is Jacob's trouble, right, also called the hour of temptation, right, as well as World War III, which both those prophecies, are here, right? The infrastructure for the MO to the TB, which is the RFID micro C-HIP, right, is already here, right? It's already, the infrastructure is already set up. We're really just waiting, for Esau to continue to, squeeze that grip, right? Putting the people in a worse case scenario, right? Everybody, for the most part now, man, they can take care of their bills. They might be able to have a few bucks to spend here and there, but soon, right, Esau's grip is going to get so tight that these people are going to have no choice, right, but to riot, but to snap, and that's what we're waiting for, the mandatory implementation, right, of the micro C-HIP, right, which will then lead to, the fulfillment of World War III, and then after that, what? Yahweh Shai is coming, which is going to be, a sight to see, right? Because Yahweh Shai, when he comes, he's coming in power and great glory, right? As the scriptures say, Yahweh Shai isn't just going to crack the sky in one measly, chariot, right? No, Yahweh Shai is coming with the army as well, man. Let's read that in Revelations 19, and we'll start at verse 10. Verse 11, it says, and I saw heaven opened, right? Talk about the sky being cracked open, like you've seen in the Avengers, right? When you had those You know, that dude, that Edomite looking dude had the Tesseract, man, and he went to the top of the building, and you had all those, monsters coming through, you know. That'll give you a good a visual, right, to land back on, right? But we really don't know what that's going to look like, man. You know, we really don't necessarily know what it's going to look like, right? What scriptures say we know in part, we prophesy in part, man. You know, but just imagine, right? The sky, just splitting, and a whole bunch of chariots coming out of it, man. And or you see this huge, large chariot coming out of the, looks like it's pulling through a cut in the sky, and chariots coming out of the bigger chariot, right? We don't necessarily know, man, but we understand that this is what's coming, right? It says, and I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, which, that's symbolic for pure power. White being symbolic for pure, and horse being symbolic for power, pure power, right? It says, and he that sat upon him was called faithful and true, and in righteousness doth judge and make war. And this is what Yahweh Shemel Shai is coming to do, right? To make war, with these heathens, right? And their armies, right? We read that in Isaiah, the 63rd chapter, right? Isaiah, the 34th chapter, Yahweh Shai ain't, he ain't playing. Our second Ezra, the 13th chapter, it says his eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, right? Because really what Yahweh Shai is coming to do, right, is going to, as we read in 1 Corinthians 15:24, to cast down all rule, power, and authority, right? And consecrate, all that power and authority unto himself, It says, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself, right? It says, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood. Again, going back to Isaiah, the 63rd chapter, right? Yahweh Shai coming and waging war, and that blood, right, staining his garment, which is symbolic for that blood being on his hands, right? Yahweh Shai is coming, right, to bring in, he's going to bring a slaughter, It says, and his name was called the Word of the Most High. Yahweh Shai, right, was the Word made flesh, right? Verse 14, it says, and the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, man. So he's going to come with, an army, right? It's not just going to be Yahweh Shai, man. When you look at in these movies and TV shows and whatnot, all these ancient, kings and whatnot, they always travel with an entourage, man, right? They're best guards, their messengers and servants and so on and so forth, man. They have many army with them, man, the best of the best, to protect the king. We'll see Yahweh Shai, his entrance is going to be more grand than any king in history, any movie or any TV show that we watch, right, of any king, right, that has a grand entrance, and Yahweh Shai going to totally eclipse that, man. It's going to totally eclipse that, right? Yahweh Shai is coming on a chariot so big, right? In Revelations, the first chapter, right? Scriptures say that every eye shall see him. Every eye shall see him, right? Let's go ahead and grab that in real quick. Revelations 1 and verse 7. It says, behold, he cometh with clouds, right? Which is talking about the chariots, right? It says, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him, even so, amen. Right? People are going to be scared when they see him, man. Because he ain't coming, just to, bring hugs and kisses and jolly-go-lucky times. No, Yahweh Shai is coming to destroy those who would not have him to reign over them, right? Which we know that's 2/3 of our people in this time, as well as the wicked, right? Period. Which we know is Esau, Edom, right? Even down to these other nations, even the 2/3 as well, like we just mentioned. Yahweh Shai coming to remove all wickedness, man, out of the power seat. Yahweh Shai ain't playing, right, at all with nobody. So let's go back. Revelations 19, and I'm gonna make this quick, man. It's a pre sit down lesson. Finna meet up with the bros, man, and go in through the Spirit, Lord will. Revelations 14 and verse 4, Revelations 19 and verse 14 says, and the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations, man. Right? The nations' armies. Right? Let's go ahead and jump to second Esdras. Salak.
To the household.
Salak. Just kind of popped up right when I went to go click on it. But that was the Elder Maya Ka'ala, from the LA camp. Go and subscribe to the Elder and be edified. Since I already brought it up, that's his channel right there. The Lord is exposing these women. GMS inspiration of the Almighty. That is the Elder, Maya Ka'ala. Since it popped up, I figured I'd say on it. But nonetheless, right, going back to 2 Esdras 13 and verse, I kind of just want to get to the point. Verse 6, right? 2 Esdras 13, verse 6, right? It's talking about Yahushua coming on that chariot, right? It says, but I beheld, and lo, he graved himself a great mountain and flew upon it, right? A hill, right? Actually, it says right here, verse 7, it says, but I would have seen the region or place where out the hill was graven, and I could not. The chariot that Yahushua is coming in is going to be so big, right? You're not going to be able to see the ends of it, right? And this is why it also said, right, every eye shall see him, man. You're going to be able to fit the chariot or fit the earth inside the chariot and still have plenty of room. That's how big that chariot, if not bigger, right? The chariot that Yahushua is coming on. Verse 8, it says, and after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together, right? Because going into Valley Yahushua, these armies being drawn together, to ultimately to fight, against one another, man. But see, when all this is happening, Yahushua is going to crack the sky, and the nations are going to stop fighting each other, and they're going to fight, try to fight Yahushua, right? And that's what it says. And after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together to subdue him were sore afraid, and yet there's fight, right? So they're going to see, right, Yahushua coming, right? And they're going to be afraid, but the Lord's going to put the spirit on them to fight anyways, right? Verse 9, it says, and lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held sword, nor any instrument of war, but only I saw that he sent out of his mouth as it had been a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests. Which is, again, right, Yahushua coming and sending out those laser beams and destruction, right, upon these nations and their militaries, man. Right? Verse 11, it says, and they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude which were prepared to fight, and burned them up every one, so that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude nothing was to be perceived, but only dust and smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid. So there you go, right? Yahushua, when he comes to crack the sky, and guess what? The wicked is going to die. And I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it's true, right? Revelations 19, verse 15 again, it says, and out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword. We just read that, right? It says, and with it he should smite the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fiercest and the wrath of the Almighty power. That's right, right? Coming to bring a great slaughter, man. And those that ultimately remain, right, after the slaughter is done, right, those that remain of the heathen are going to be put into captivity, right? And those that remain of the Israelites, which are going to be the, ultimately the elect, are ultimately going to be, set up under Yahushua in the proper order as rulers and kings, right? And priests, right, of the rest of the world for all eternity, man. Again, under Yahushua in the proper order, man. That's what's coming, man. Right? So in his dream, he was walking around and seeing a whole bunch of people by going about their business and snapping their heads like they hear something, and out of their mouths they're saying, someone's coming. Looking up to the sky, looking around. Hey, well, there is someone coming, right? Yahushua is coming, And when Yahushua comes, it ain't going to be, again, right, Matter of fact, let's go ahead and end on this. In Amos the 5th chapter, I'll begin at verse 18. It says, woe unto you that desire the day of Yahweh. To what end is it for you? The day of Yahweh is darkness and not light, right? So when everything pops off, you're thinking that, okay, when he comes, like the Christians think the rapture, and they think they're going to be delivered and this and the third. And well, guess what, man? that is false doctrine, man. That is a stronghold that has been pulled down, beginning with the elder apostles on down many, many, many times, man. There is no such thing as a rapture. There's destruction and deliverance. Matthew's 24th chapter, right out of Yahushai's mouth, right? His words, he said that he's coming to gather the elect, right? And at the same time, he's going to make a sore destruction, of the wicked, man, beginning with their armies, right? And then coming over here, moving west to destroy America, man. That is what's coming. That is who is coming, and that's what he's going to do when he comes, So, hey, for you, you people thinking that, it's going to go in your favor, man, you better turn to Yahweh Shemel Shai, right? So that way when he does come, right, that anger can be turned from you, And if you don't, man, you're ultimately screwed, man. But that's all I got, man. Quick hit through the spirit, man. Just wanted to ultimately speak on that. It was spiritual that he told me that, man, out of nowhere, But I figured I'd share it with y'all, man. Lord will is edifying, Lord will straight to the point. I'm going to give all praise, honor, glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak, Wadash, the Lord said the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the great millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.